counting cash in KC, but was it worth it? Monday night was a big old kick in the no-no places for Jets fans. So now what? And the latest injury updates from two playoff contenders in the AFC North. We've got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it's time for Inside Coverage. I'm Jason Fitz, hanging out with Yahoo senior NFL reporter Charles Robinson. C-Rob, we got so much to get into. It's time for Inside Coverage. We'll get to all the inside stuff, but first and foremost, as you get a few days away from week one, kind of walk me through this, because to me, week one was a gem for the NFL. In a world where, you know, I do a lot of college football work with us too. College football hasn't given us a lot of great matchups. I was sitting there week one in the Venetian, like watching all of these games go down and thinking, this is the beauty of the NFL. They're all close. They're all epic. We're watching almost all of these down to the wire.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely tell. You hear all the complaints in the preseason about offensive lines. Like, our offensive line's not up to speed. We need more snaps for the offensive line. And then you have, I think it was like 8 quarterbacks didn't play in the preseason this year. And again, with those lines, the quarterback combinations, the fact that you're not rolling out a lot of your offensive starters, is it surprising that it felt like a lot of those games in week one? Now, there were some outliers, but it felt like a lot of those games we watched defenses that were so much further ahead of the offenses as we opened the week. I mean, I think this is just a byproduct of teams that refuse to roll out quarterbacks, refuse to roll out cohesive starting offensive units, and then are also complaining about not having those offensive line snaps. I think this is the new in the NFL. I think we're going to go through a few weeks early on where you're going to see defenses ahead of the offenses. It's going to create a lack of separation just because there's not going to be a ton of scoring between the multitude of 32 teams out there. And we really won't know, I think, fully what some of these offenses look like until, mid-October, late September.
Which, by the way, this is the take that makes me objectively bad at my job sometimes. Like, I look at everything in threes. So for me, in a 3-week bunch, now maybe I have a takeaway that I can really start to plant a flag with. Same with seasons. Like, if last season was one thing and the year before was a different thing, then I look at this. So everything for me comes in threes. You're exactly right. I looked at so much of this, and we want to react and overreact to all of it. And it's hard not to, but there are some points where it's like, right now, we don't know if the Steelers offense is a problem or if the 49ers defense is going to be a problem for everybody. Like, 1 week doesn't give us enough of an answer on a lot of this to know. Unfortunately, we live in a world where Monday morning quarterback is everything. I think, like, first of the month quarterback might be better suited to me. I don't know that makes me good at my job, though. Like, that's kind of what we have to do, right?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think week one, I always call week one, I say it's a fantastic liar. I think that's more accurate now than ever before. I was at Bears-Packers, and I sat there and I watched it, and I said, I watched the Bears offense get booed like midway through the second quarter of that game by their own home fans. And I'm thinking, like, Justin Fields doesn't look great here. There's all kinds of issues. DJ Moore, Jair Alexander's basically erased him from this game. And then you look at the Packers defense and it looks exquisite, amazing. Jordan Love seems to be fitting into that offense. And I'm like, how accurate is this? What I'm looking at right now. And I actually went back and I looked at week one of 2022, and I saw this game where a quarterback went out, dug himself a hole in week one, threw 4 touchdown passes by the end of the game, bounces back, and beat, of all quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars go down. And everybody's upset. Like, oh my God, it's the same Trevor Lawrence as the Urban Meyer era. It's the same Jaguars, the same problems. And the quarterback who beat him was Carson Wentz. Now, we walked out of week one of 2022. I think people thought, hey, Carson Wentz could be, he has some of the same mistakes or whatever, but he came back in this game. He bounced back like he could be getting it together. No, it was completely inaccurate. Trevor Lawrence was going to be the man over the course of that season. We were going to see the growth and development. And Carson Wentz was effectively going to erase his career over the expanse of 2022. And yet, week one, coming out of that tilt between those two teams, I think we thought something completely different and completely inaccurate.
Well, the only one takeaway that we know is 100% certain is that the Raiders are 1-0, which means they're going to go undefeated this year, and it's going to be an epic season. Just let me live. Let me have this one moment.
I'll
okay,
let you have
it. Thank you so much. Let's get to some news and notes from around the league. And look, I want to start by being a little snarky, but also respectful here, if that's possible. what's the point of a holdout? Like Chris Jones signs a new deal, 1 year. He could get up to $25 million. Been a lot of math being done by
Yeah.
everybody on social media figuring this out. Start with the Chris Jones deal. How did they get there? But also, I don't know, man. Like I'm looking at all these holdouts saying, what are you really gaining from it?
Well, it's interesting. You say up to $25 million. He wanted a straight shot increase in salary, right? And I think going from that 19 million to that 25 million, it represents that, but a lot of it is so incentivized that I'm kind of in the camp with you. I'm like, did this really accomplish what you wanted? You can still get franchise tag, which to me is really the bigger deal here. If you go through the pain of a holdout, if you go through a pain of this kind of a negotiation, at least pull the tag off the table. Take it away from them that, look, you're going to hit free agency, free and clear the next year. Then I can understand it. But for it to be, an incentivized deal, and, again, it's Chris Jones. Do I think this is the kind of guy who can exceed the remainder of the season, hit that $25 million? Yeah, I do. I guess ultimately you look at it as they sort of split the baby here. He wanted an increase in salary. They did not want to put him in that sort of Aaron Donald neighborhood, $30 million plus. They go from 19 to potentially 25 million. That's right in the middle of that zone between the 19 and, $30 plus million. Now, Chris Jones did come out prior to this and he said, I'm not looking for, Aaron Donald money. I'm looking for a raise. This represents that. I think going through week one, even though Kansas City Chiefs fans don't want to believe it, I do think it was a little bit of an eye-opener for that Chiefs staff and the Chiefs front office that, look, we can't let this drag out. We've already dropped a game. We can't let that happen again. And, so I think it helped him ultimately at the negotiating table. We'll see how this pans out the rest of the season. But at the very least, I still will never understand this kind of a negotiation not taking a franchise tag off the table. And yet we've seen it happen now 3 times. 2 running backs and a key, obviously, defensive piece for the Kansas City Chiefs not achieving removing another franchise tag potential in 2024.
But this is what blows my mind about it, right? Because everything you just said resonates to the franchise tag, the issues with the franchise tag that are never going anywhere. And, every former player I've ever talked to, when I ask the same question, because fans always say, well, they should just change this. The PA should come in and vote this out. Well, it only impacts 32 players. And so thousands of players are not going to vote on something that only impacts 32 players. Like, we all know this. So the franchise tag isn't going anywhere. And what this summer has actually done, in my mind, is it's empowered teams to continue to use it wherever, whenever they want, because all 3 holdouts didn't last long enough to make an impact truly to the team's win-loss column. All 3 holdouts didn't result in new contracts that don't allow the franchise tag to be used next year. And all 3 holdouts resulted in nominal raises. Like, I'm looking at it across the board saying, well, if I'm the Raiders, I feel pretty good about what happened with Josh Jacobs. If I'm the Giants, I feel pretty good about Saquon. And if I'm the Chiefs, I feel pretty good about Chris Jones. Like, across the board, the teams won here, the players didn't. And this makes me more confident that every year teams are going to continue to, it's going to take a disruptor. And none of the 3 this year actually disrupted or, in my mind, accomplished that much.
Well, and as you said, too, I mean, that people fail to understand that idea of 32. It can affect, as you said, 32 players. Now, technically, with the threat of the franchise tag, I guess it can affect more than 30. Like, we'll look at the Giants. Like, they basically threatened potentially Daniel Jones. Like, hey, if you don't get a deal done with us, we could use the franchise tag here. They threatened and then used it on Saquon Barkley. But let's be honest, at max, even if it's, let's say, 2 players per team, that's 64 players. And you hit it on the head. When it comes down to getting rid of the franchise tag in a CBA negotiation, the league looks at the players union and says, okay, you want to talk about that? Well, we're going to have to trade something really significant for it, as in the 17th game. That was the previous conversation, adding an additional game to the schedule. I can tell you the next CBA negotiation, if the union goes to the table and says, we got to get rid of the franchise tag, they'll say, all right, well, now let's talk about 18 regular season games. Well, yeah, the vast majority of players sitting there are going to go, this doesn't impact me. And the union's telling us that 18 games is not good for us. Why am I going to vote for something to really enrich someone on a roster who's already rich anyway? I'm making the minimum or, somewhere close to it, which is the vast majority of the NFL is the middle down, right? I mean, that's by and large everyone who creates that vote. They're not going to trade off that. They're going to say, give me more health insurance, raise the minimum salary floor, make it easier for us to add to our pension. Let us get to the pension more quickly. Those are the things that they're going to want to trade for, not the franchise tag. And I guess if there's one thing here that the agents are saying to the players, it's like, hey, we didn't get rid of the franchise tag, but you know what, Chris? If you hit 25 million this year and they use it next year, that's 120% raise you're going to get on top of the 25 million. So, let's look at this realistically. You're going to get that 25 million plus. You're going to be that much closer to the $30 million ceiling. We'll take it. It's still a lot of money. Go out and hit your markers and make sure that if they use it next year, it's more painful.
Yeah, and that's a really strong point by you. The math of it becomes unsustainable. I think that's probably the logic. Still feel like the teams won here, but it's going to be interesting to see how this impacts all three of them. If Josh Jacobs, Saquon, or Chris Jones goes out and has historic numbers this year, it'll get wild. Now, obviously, a lot of talk Monday night about the injury to Aaron Rodgers, which I promise you we will get to. Some interesting insights there coming from Charles. But that wasn't the only Achilles injury that we had, unfortunately, in week one. And I feel like we've almost lost sight of the other one because it's not a quarterback. J.K. Dobbins, this season is over with an Achilles injury for the Ravens. And I keep looking at this, particularly the way look, we know it's a new offensive coordinator. We know Monken's going to spread this thing out, but there's still a team that has the ability to run the football. This feels to me like this was absolutely a worst case scenario, obviously, for the Ravens, right? Like I'm having a hard time figuring out if they need to go out and desperately try and add something, or do they stay put where they are?
Well, this is where we start to stare at what their start will be and the October 31st trade deadline, because as we've talked about before already, if there are any movable commodities in the NFL, we know it's going to be running backs, right? We've talked about the devaluation of the running back position. I can tell you as you get close to that deadline, the most swappable player in the NFL is ultimately going to be a running back. Running backs, somewhat they need to learn the scheme. They need to be able to, pick up blocks, things like that. But for the most part, you can plug and play most running backs. They can swap into different schemes. Here's how you're going to get the ball, find the hole, make the cut, go. And I'll say this for the Ravens, if there was a player that was a position player that was losable, it would ultimately be the running back because of the availability. But this is a dynamic guy, and it's unfortunate because it's like years here where we look at J.K. Dobbins and we're like, okay, well, this is the year he's going to be healthy. This is the year he's going to put up that, big monster season we've been expecting since he came into the league. And then once again, it gets undercut by injuries. We're talking like 3 years in running where significant injuries have happened, and it has taken a really important chess piece off the board for the Baltimore Ravens. Terrible because it's a contract year for him. It was, he wanted that extension in the offseason. He ultimately didn't get it. He was singing for his supper in 2023, and that tune went completely off cue. So rough start in that respect for the Ravens. I will say, though, that it's ultimately fixable in the long run if they do feel like they need to add another running back. I think right now it's more important that they get Lamar Jackson in tune with the wide receivers. They get Odell Beckham living up to the contract that he signed in the offseason. And then you can start to think about adding maybe a running back piece down the line. But man, as you said, it's just, we're so focused in on Aaron Rodgers, but there's another guy in Dobbins where it's just an absolutely devastating moment for his career.
You mentioned Lamar, and it really hit me watching week one. I think I felt like Todd Monken and the Ravens were going to have a huge advantage. The new offensive coordinator there, going to have a huge advantage because we didn't know what to expect. And instead, I felt like maybe week one, I undervalued how much time it's going to take for those guys to get in sync, because it just felt like they didn't hit in sync, being over me with Funko Pop, shit like that. It was going to take them a second to get together. It took them longer than I expected. I do wonder, and this is just blatant speculation. I know nothing. So I'm just asking you because you're the smart guy in the room. You've mentioned over the course of our time working together, a couple of names. Like we've talked a lot about Jonathan Taylor and were the Colts ever really serious about trading him. You mentioned, much to my heartbreak, that if things go off the rails for my beloved Raiders, that, Josh Jacobs could be a tradable asset. Devontae Adams could be a tradable asset. I'm looking at the Ravens, to your point, and wondering, where do you find the line between patience is a virtue, right? Because like part of me says you don't give up a first round draft pick for a running back, but then part of me says, I don't know, like it was 1 week, but the Bengals certainly didn't look like we thought the Bengals looked. The Ravens are trying to win a Super Bowl. Like maybe this forces you to be more aggressive than you would be if you could get a guy that you could bank on not just for this year, but several years. I'm not sure it makes him a player, but in my mind, when I piece the bricks together, that makes sense to me.
The idea of how long do you wait is interesting because I think it's different for each franchise. I don't think anybody hits the panic button on how the offense or defense is functioning, even injuries, unless it's a quarterback, which we'll get to. Right. I think at the very least, teams want to get through 2 games. And if you start off 0-2, that's when you start to get a little nervous, right? That's the Charles Haley putting the helmet through the wall because Emmitt Smith's not signed, Dallas Cowboys moment. That's when I think players know.
That's a great pull by you, by the way. That is a great, that is well done by you, sir.
Showing my age there. But I think even in a 17-game season, most teams know that when you start 0-2, you've now dug yourself a fairly significant hole. The numbers, again, a lot of people are relying on the 16-game season rather than a 17-game season, but the numbers significantly reverse in terms of whether or not that's recoverable. And God forbid you start 0-3. 0-3, that's when it's full panic mode. That's when it's like, okay, now we are tipping on the edge of, do we add a piece now? What can we do now to turn this around? And if we go beyond this threshold, 0-3, now we're starting to say, well, who do we sell off by the trade deadline? Because we're creeping into territory where this is at some point going to feel like it's not recoverable. But again, to go back to 2022 and remind people to not panic. I talked about the Jaguars losing to the Commanders right out of the chute. They went 2-6 to start last season, 2-6, and we would have thought like, hey, that's not recoverable. Obviously, they did recover. Sometimes I think it's just sort of having patience and knowing who's on the roster and what growth is there. I would tend to believe the Ravens, unless you're going to get a lot of the growth out of like a Zay Flowers, there are a lot of veteran pieces, there, and you kind of know after the first couple of games what you're likely to get out of those players moving forward. So I wouldn't say it's a panic mode yet, but I do understand what you're saying. Like, how much longer do you wait, especially in this situation where you just did the big deal with Lamar. You added all these pieces. This is supposed to be your window. You can't let it slip away this easily.
You call it panic mode. You'll learn this in our time working together. I like to call it Kermit D. Frog mode, where you're like, everywhere you're running. That's my, I'm usually by week 3 or 4, I'm in full Kermit D. Frog mode. And it's D in the middle, by the way. I'm very clear on that. Kermit D. Frog running around my basement every Sunday as I watch football. Speaking of panic mode, I don't know that there was anybody more like I'm sitting there, I'm watching games on Sunday, right? I'm hanging out. We're at the new Yahoo Sportsbook at the Venetian in Las Vegas, right? So I'm sitting next to Frank Schwab. And Frank, the number of times Frank and I just looked at each other dumbfounded, trying to figure out what in the hell we were watching when it came to the Steelers offense was just, it was appalling. It was gross. It was everything we didn't think it would be after the preseason. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, Diontae Johnson out with a hamstring injury. So if you're the Steelers right now, you got to figure out how to take care of Diontae. You got to figure out what's wrong with Kenny Pickett. You got to figure out how to get the rest of these weapons that everybody drafted in fantasy football involved. Like it feels right now like things are a little uneasy for organization that I thought was going to come out of the gates and really show something in week 1. Yeah, they showed a whole barrel of suck in that game. So what do they do at this point with the Diontae situation?
Well, first off, props to you for mentioning that you were hanging out in the whole Yahoo Sportsbook event, but you brought up Frank Schwab and not Mark Wahlberg. So I give you props for bringing up.
Look, I got an issue with it since you brought me there. Mark, I got it. Mark and I got beef. It's great, dude. It was a great interview. Here's my beef. Like, I work out a lot. Like, I go to Orange Theory all the time. I'm getting that fitness flow on, right? Like, I'm trying. Right?
I don't think Orange Theory is in the Mark Wahlberg vocabulary,
no.
But here we go.
Much different. But here's the thing. Like, Mark sells his, like, workout clothes all the time. That municipal stuff, right? Like, looks cool. Looks awesome. I follow Mark on social media. I'm part of the target audience. I would buy these things. It looks cool. My question is, in every post, why does he have to lift his shirt up? Like, that's the thing. Like, every post, he's showing me the shirt. I'm like, I like the shirt. Then he shows me the abs. I'm like, I can't buy the abs. I can buy the shirt. I can't buy the abs, Mark. Like, I had beef with him, but we didn't have time to get into the beef. Also, I was intimidated by the abs in person. I'm gonna admit that. I wasn't intimidated by Frank's abs in person. I was intimidated by Mark's abs in person.
I mean, I think
No
it's,
offense, Frank.
listen, if you got Mark Wahlberg's abs or biceps, it's probably an imperative to show those off. Frank, on the other hand, not so much. I love the Frank slander without him being here to defend himself, by the way.
I feel so terrible. I feel terrible. All right, Diontae Johnson, I promise. Go ahead.
Yeah. Kudos to you, though. Look, Diontae Johnson, I think if you're the Steelers, would I be alarmed offensively? And I went through their camp, right? And all I heard was, this is the Kenny Pickett growth year. We convinced you, Fitz, we convinced you last week that Kenny Pickett could take a stride, right? I felt terrible as I watched that game. I'm like, God, we got Fitz on board with Kenny Pickett, this being that year where he takes the step. And then they absolutely got mollywopped against San Francisco. Now, the one-sided affairs that I'm less concerned about, I think it's when, again, as I said, I think defenses are so far ahead of offenses right now. I think the offensive lines for most teams are still getting it together. And so when you get destroyed, just get destroyed by an elite defense, okay? To me, it's a little more explainable that you come out, things did not click, it all slid in one direction horribly, but it might be an overreaction to think this is the picture that we got. And I think the Giants had it against Dallas, where you had an elite defense that can get after you, that can hit the quarterback repeatedly, overwhelm your offensive line. It's sort of the same situation with Pittsburgh. I watched Pittsburgh completely overwhelmed against the San Francisco 49ers. The front was doing anything they wanted. I think Kenny Pickett at some point, you stop looking downfield, right? But then on top of that, to add Diontae Johnson and that injury to this situation where, so little looked effective for that Steelers offense, there's no doubt. I mean, it's definitely troubling. You can't afford to lose a receiver in that situation. I do think, did we get what we wanted out of the Steelers running game? That's what's a little concerning to me. Like, find the primary back, right? We're all like, well, it's Najee Harris. I don't know now. Go back and watch that game. Like, I think there's a little lack of determination about who they absolutely can count on running the football. But again, I think this was more of a San Francisco game than it was an absolute true representation of where Pittsburgh's going, just like I thought the same thing with the Giants. But now I think Pittsburgh's in the same situation that Brian Daboll and the Giants are. Just maybe don't watch the tape. Just destroy it. Let's just say nothing went right. That's not us. Let's go back to the drawing board and start over again. I think Kenny Pickett's a better player than that. But they've got a situation there where now you're down a significant receiver in that core. Now, Allen Robinson's going to have to absolutely step up. George Pickens is going to absolutely have to step up. Those are two players that are just going to have to shoulder more of that passing load, and they got to find a running back.
I think to that point, too, it changes the pressure for everybody. Like you mentioned the 0-2 start. Sometimes a slow start's one thing. A slow start where what we thought would be a strength looks like a weakness can cause a little bit of angst for everybody. But when you look at this injury particularly, and the fact that they didn't run the ball the way we expected they would run the ball, it puts pressure on all of that. The way teams are going to defend the Steelers now changes drastically. And it means that Pickens is going to see a lot more great coverage than he was going to see before, right? It means that they can afford to stack the box if Pickens or Robinson doesn't step up. Like, the way it changes everything for the Steelers offense, I think is pretty significant. So it's a blow to the Steelers. The one comfort I think the Steelers fan base can take in the AFC right now, particularly, is that the AFC North, that we all think is going to be great. I obviously, we watched the Bengals get decimated. The Browns won, and I really don't care. Deshaun Watson was not good in that football game. Like, the underthrown footballs everywhere. Like, they won, but I'm not looking at the tape on that saying, oh my God, the Browns look like a juggernaut. So at least the Steelers can look around and say, okay, Ravens injuries, like maybe the Steelers can look at it and say we have a little bit of time to be patient in this division. That, if you're a fan, that's the one thing you're holding on to. But it changes everything. Now, a couple of times over the course of the show, you've already mentioned that offensive lines are behind. And not only are offensive lines behind, but let's be honest, I don't think, as much as we used to talk about there aren't 32 effective quarterbacks in the NFL, I don't think there are 32 great right tackles, 32 great left tackles in the league, right? So Jack Conklin out for the year for the Browns, that's somebody that they are banking on, relying on. DeJuan Jones comes in, and that's fine, but anytime there's a significant offensive line injury in the NFL, I do sit back for that whole fan base and get a little puckered up. I get nervous for him because it's just not realistic to think that your backup's going to come in and be that superstar.
And the worst thing about the Browns is, it's funny. I had a conversation with someone in the organization, in that brain trust, last week, and they felt great. Like like it was the first conversation in really a long time, maybe ever, in the last few years in Cleveland, where I heard a person on the other end of the phone saying, like, we kind of feel like the roster's complete. Like, we're not going to go out there and we're not going to say it. We're not going to say that this is the best we felt in, a few years. But in terms of the depth, the strength of where the roster was, I think entering into week one, they felt great about where they were at. But of all the units, when you sit there and, as you said, I mean, there's just not great tackles when you go through camps, right? When you go on these training camp tours, you always get asked the question, like, well, who's going to come loose? Who's going to get, who could potentially get cut? Who could get traded? And they're always asking, and I've said this for years now, you hear offensive line, almost anybody. Is there anybody worth anything who might get cut or traded from an offensive line, from any of the places you've visited, and turn and run linebackers? Linebackers basically who can run with difference-making running backs or tight ends or whoever. But absolutely, the overwhelming, I think, of any position in the NFL where you don't want to lose a player, it's at one of the tackle positions, because it's almost impossible to replace. As you said, DeJuan Jones, I mean, I think he stepped in, he did a good job. I do think they feel like they have the confidence in him to be able to do that job. But it puts more pressure, I think, now on that offensive line, which has had injuries in the past. You're kind of in a spot now where you can't suffer anymore. Like, this is it. Like, you cannot suffer any more injuries, because now you're going to start to put yourself in a situation where, especially given the tackle positions, you're going to potentially put Deshaun Watson at risk, right? I mean, we're going to get to the quarterback that got hurt in week one, and the offensive line that had something to do with it. The last thing you want is to see Deshaun Watson getting hit. Otherwise, though, I will say this about Cleveland. They felt great about their defense. I was like, okay, well, let's see what the defense and the defense looks spectacular.
Great. Yeah, they look great.
One. Yeah. So it's unfortunate, because I think they feel so great, but to have a cornerstone kind of, and right tackles are cornerstones now. We always talk about left tackles, edge rusher, cornerback, right? Those are the three positions that you pay everybody, and those are the ones you can't lose. Put right tackles in that spot now, because guess what? Right tackles get paid now. They're just as important as anybody else. Teams like to flip-flop edge rushers to left and right all the time to create mismatches. Extremely important player that they just lost there. But this is where Andrew Berry, the general manager, and then obviously Kevin Stefanski and that coaching staff, they've got to make their money now and look, plug the hole. This is just how it goes.
Yeah, and I want to give a little bit of love here to Nick Chubb too, who was just like, that was watching a damn work of art, the way he was running the football there. The number of times that it felt like he was stuck and he got around it. And in fairness, I'm critical, obviously, when we started this of Deshaun's performance. I realized it was particularly slick out there. So it
wasn't a good week for running backs, was it? Like, no. It was, other than McCaffrey and Chubb, I was like, God, running backs kind of suck. Like, coming out like week one, I'm like, where are all the 100-yard guys? Where are all the, instead what we saw around the league was a bunch of share situations, a bunch of rotations. But I'm glad you brought up Chubb, because other than McCaffrey, he was really the only other running back that I looked like, where I was like, if you and I are sitting there and instead of Frank Schwab, and I'm showing you my abs, and we're talking about whether or not we can pick a potential rushing leader this year, like who's going to lead the league in rushing. Well, if I said, give me the NFC guy, give me the AFC guy, you would have said McCaffrey and Chubb, right? I mean, that was represented in week one, I thought.
Yeah, and by the way, I can't focus on your abs. I got to focus on the game, right? Like, it's be impossible if I'm sitting there and you're flashing the abs. I mean, that's just, I can't focus on the game. Just watching all the games at once. Flowers to Nick Chubb, obviously, and we'll see what they're able. I'm convinced after 1 week, again, week one overreaction. I feel like right now any quarterback can just hand off to Chubb, and that defense plays that well, they're going to win 9-10 games anyway. So, Cleveland still a team to watch with a big week one win. We've teased it the entire show so far. Yes, yes, it is impossible this week to not talk about Aaron Rodgers, but there's one angle on Aaron Rodgers still impacting the Packers that you haven't thought about yet, and you should. We'll give it to you next. Inside coverage, Charles Robinson. I'm Jason Fitz, and you know what? I think we've set a record this week. This is the longest any show has gone without actually breaking down Aaron Rodgers.
By far, like we blew it out of like it's not even close. Like I'm stunned. Everyone else is like 3 seconds. All right, let's talk about Rodgers.
I feel like there's two things. One, I'm slightly proud, but also like when the bosses listen to this episode and they give us feedback, which we love getting, the boss is going to send a note, be like, great show. Should have led with Rodgers. It's fine. It's fine. All right. So we get to the Aaron Rodgers landmark here, but here's the 4 snaps. And I'm going to say this loud before we get into anything. I'll never forget, as over melodramatic as this sounds, I'll never forget where I was sitting there the year that the Raiders were very good with Derek Carr, and Derek Carr injured his leg late in the season. I remember I was sitting there, it was right before Christmas, playing games with the family. All of a sudden, the injury happens. You realize that all of the Super Bowl hopes that I truly had for my favorite team went down the drain. I never want any fan to feel the way that any of us feel as a fan, as a human being, when you watch your favorite team's season just go down in the drains. And to have that happen four snaps in was bad for the NFL. It was bad for Jets fans. It was bad for everybody. It was heartbreaking for a fan base that had so much hope. It would have made my heart happier to watch Aaron Rodgers fizzle out and not be any good, or have Aaron Rodgers come out and make the Super Bowl, than to have never even get the chance. Because for the rest of their lives, Jets fans are going to say, remember that year where we were that good and Aaron Rodgers got hurt 4 snaps in, and they're right to do it.
Never completed a regular season pass for the Jets. Like how insane is that, given the amount of time, effort that went into the acquisition, the buildup, all of this. And it really is a timestamp moment, Fitz. Like, I think whether or not you were a Jets fan, if you were watching the game as an NFL fan, and I think this is true for other players, I think this is true for other coaches, general managers, anybody that was watching this game, you kind of knew where you were when it happened, you know. And it's funny because as we've listened to all the Rodgers stories, almost everyone relates it through how they experienced it. Like, I was this, I was that. Here's where I was in the game. I couldn't believe it. Like, you're just sitting there and you're watching this, and you're watching it. Like I said, a timestamp moment. You see it happen, and it's going to be impossible years later to not think back to this. Now, we'll see how this plays out. Maybe Aaron Rodgers comes back in 2024 and erases this memory, but this was unquestionably the center of the universe. It was the biggest storyline going into this season. The NFL, I mean, the league office had to be in tears watching this happen, because you just lost a record-setting Monday night game, largely because of Aaron Rodgers going into this game. And then, as you said, like the Jets organization, everything that you brought to bear to make this happen, to have this be the outcome is just utterly devastating. And yesterday, I was on the phone almost all day. I had a long drive, and so I'm talking to a lot of people around the league. And what was remarkable to me is other people in front offices and coaching staffs, people don't even particularly like Aaron Rodgers for whatever their reasons are. You know, some people just don't like his personality, this, that's something, he's a diva. To a person, to an individual, all like just heartbroken for the guy, because they're like, I was talking to a GM yesterday, and who, I know Rodgers is not his flavor. He literally said the phrase, my heart broke for the guy. And he said, because I have been there where you go to the table, you pour something into an acquisition, you think this is what brings your team together, and then something like this happens, and not only does it destroy you personally, and you think of all the income that was put into that, but then you look at how it affects the roster, and then you think about this individual who came and bought into your culture, bought into your program, brought along players, raised the level of everyone in the organization by being in there and putting himself into your franchise, and then to lose them in that fashion. Now, this general manager hadn't lost someone 4 snaps in, which is just crazy. But I thought it was pretty remarkable to see like everyone almost had their heart broken for Aaron Rodgers in that situation.
So with that being said, there's 2 different conversations here, and we'll get to both of them. The first is, trading for somebody. And I think there's an important note on the concept of trading for somebody, because a lot has been made of what the Jets should do and how the Jets should acquire somebody. But as you pointed out, I think people need to understand it's not as simple, because both sides, the Packers and the Jets, are still impacted by
Yep.
the trade that was made for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, it was the centerpiece of this deal is a second rounder that was going to graduate into a first rounder, right? If he all he had to do is play 65% of the snaps. And Joe Douglas, the Jets general manager, I think he caught a lot of hell when the deal went down, because people said, well, that's ridiculous. 65%, that's such a low threshold. Of course, he's going to play 65%. Yeah, no, he's not going to play 0.6% of the snaps, which is it's awful. But if I could take you back to that negotiation, I remember that moment and what everyone criticized, like, why is this taking so long? Why are they bickering? Why is this not going to get done? A huge sticking point in that deal was that the Packers insisted on, we want a straight shot first round pick out of this, not a first round pick swap, not this, that, and the other thing. In the 2024 draft, we want a straight shot first round pick. And Joe Douglas was like, not happening. Not gonna give you a straight shot first round pick. There's no way. And the reason, talking to people inside the Jets organization during the time this was going down, they're like, we got to protect ourselves. Like, we can't. There's a possibility, and it's awful when you think about this now. I literally remember someone saying to me, well, what if Aaron goes out in that first game and he tears an ACL? And at the time, I'm like, come on. Like, whose luck is that bad? Like, I mean, this is so improbable. Like, and then it happens and you realize why they stuck to their guns, in this situation and refused to just give up a first round pick. Right now, you'd be staring at losing Aaron Rodgers, having the pick swap, all these other parts of this deal that went into this. But then looking at a 2024 draft that, by the way, is going to be loaded with quarterbacks. You could have like 5 quarterbacks go in the first round. And now that's the Packers pick just straight away. Well, guess what? Now it's not. Packers are going to get a second rounder. It's not going to graduate. Didn't play the 65% of the snaps. And the Jets are going to have, if this turns into the worst case scenario with a Zach Wilson, I doubt it. Teams built to run the football. Teams built to play great defense. You can scratch out some wins in this league when you're built like that. But if it's a worst case scenario and everything falls apart, you still have your first round pick to potentially look at the quarterback position. If Aaron Rodgers turns and says, yeah, you know what? I love this situation, but I'm 40. Achilles rehab is it's a bear. It's really tough for me to think about, and probably not going to be back after this. This will go down as one of the worst situations ever for a franchise. What an important moment, though, for that front office to have protected itself. And I think you got to, as awful as everything has turned out, you got to tip your cap to Joe Douglas for, at the very least, saying, I'm not just going to give you another first round pick in 2024. You're going to have to earn it. We're protecting ourselves.
Well, and now we can definitively say for the rest of time, Aaron Rodgers was traded for a second round draft pick. That's how it worked out, right? So that's going to be side A. And Jordan Love, of course, in one game, a lot of jokes made about the fact that, that he took over the ownership of Chicago for the Packers. So there's a lot of hope, but still he was traded for a second round draft pick. But even more interesting than that is there's an important element to the first round pick that the Jets own, because a lot of people now are saying, well, go out. If you need to trade a first round draft pick, just go trade a first round draft pick and go get yourself a quarterback. But as you had pointed out, and I didn't know, it's not that simple for the Jets even to go out and move their first round pick.
Everything in this situation is complicated by, like, what's the future ultimately going to look like? Okay. And they've got to give Aaron Rodgers time. Now you're sitting there and you're staring at an asset in that first round pick for the Jets. It's got to be used, right? That now has to be used in a way that offsets maybe Aaron leaving, offsets. What if Aaron Rodgers says, I'll come back in 2024. I made a 2-year commitment here. I'm going to honor that. What do we know? What's Aaron going to look like? We don't know what he's going to look like. And by the way, he got injured probably because that offensive line was not as good as it needed to be. That's an issue here. I mean, he's under pressure every single time he dropped back to pass. There were a couple of cut blocks that took place, on that drive, which is, if you don't get that ball out fast, cut blocks are really super dangerous for quarterbacks. They can get hammered if a player avoids a cut block. And So if you're the Jets, you're thinking, okay, well, Aaron's going to come back. We probably should use that asset on an offensive line piece, right? We should probably, or maybe we use it in a trade to go and beef up the offensive line. And you can't just expend it now for another piece because, what's your window? Do you really believe in your window? Like if Zach Wilson lights the world on fire, you can't go out and spend it on a Devontae Adams now, right? I mean, you're gonna add Devontae Adams and spend that first round pick on that now at this point? I hate to bring it up, sorry.
Thank you.
But it's just it's now an asset that because of the fact that you don't have a second round pick, and you don't really know what the future holds with Aaron Rodgers. I think it's really hard to dangle that out there for another player to improve a team that maybe the ceiling is a little more capped than it used to be, and you have to prepare for maybe Aaron Rodgers coming back in 2024 and how you can best suit him.
So now, for 1 second, I'm actually going to be smart. I try not to do this too often. It sets the standard too high. But I want to be smart when it comes to one conversation because I've seen it everywhere, including the place I used to work, ESPN. I've seen it everywhere. Go out there and get you Tom Brady.
Oh
Tom Brady.
Yeah.
So I want to be very clear on this in case because a lot of people don't know this, but I got educated on this by these same insiders when I worked with them. All right. It's important to note because there was all the speculation over the summer. Could Brady at some point be the quarterback of the Raiders? So I went in and I asked everybody. And this is the important note. The application for ownership has already been submitted. The league is looking at the application for ownership. The bylaws of the NFL are very clear. You cannot be part of an ownership group and also play. So the only way that Tom Brady could play would be if he went in and the Raiders went in and decided they were going to remove that application for ownership for vote, which there's been no indication would happen. To do that, Tom Brady would also have to decide that he no longer wants to be a part of a franchise that is right now giving him the chance for ownership, which is not easy to get in the NFL. And he would have to come back and play for the Jets behind that very offensive line. The number of things that would have to be put together to bring Brady there is just virtually impossible, and it doesn't align with any of the business values he has shown. It is not as simple as I want Brady. Like I don't know why I use that voice, but I have to loudly say it because I saw respected media outlets coming out saying just go out and sign Brady. You can't. It's not possible. So I'm not going to dunk a basketball tomorrow. Tom Brady is also not going to play in the NFL this year. I just had to say that.
The respected media outlets. Apparently Kermit the Frog was the reporter.
Yeah. I don't know why it's a Kermit the Frog voice, but someone's like, yeah, that's what everybody sounds like when I don't like what they're saying.
But it makes sense, though. I mean, it kind of fits because it was two parts of this conversation that I've seen elsewhere are so absurd. Number one, the ease of just going out and getting Tom Brady. I'm so glad you addressed this because, as you said, it would basically take Brady saying, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and not pick up that ownership stake in the Raiders. Like that's the easiest way for that to occur is him just clap his hands and walking away from this. We'll deal with it later. Or on the other side of the ownership stake being approved, then it goes to like a vote. Can Tom go and play? Like all these, it's just the complication of it is ridiculous. And oh, by the way, there's just this little small idea of it's the Jets, okay? And he is someone who is going into the Patriots Ring of Honor. Are you telling me that Robert Kraft is going to sit there and go, yeah, I'm okay with that. Sure. We've completely wiped out the waiting period for, the Patriots Ring of Honor. You're going to go ahead and you're going in next year. We already announced it. Tom was running around in the jersey, fist pumping. And you're telling me he's going to walk out there in I guess, I don't know what number he would have now. He can't have 12, can't have 8. I don't know what number Tom Brady with it, but it's the Jets. I think even Tom Brady's got to go, that's a bridge too far. There's I already did the crypto thing. That was a really bad idea. This is probably also a really bad idea. So
I have never begged our team for anything more than I'm about to beg Stone, our producer extraordinaire, to make sure that quote, it's the Jets, just gets cut off and we can run, win or lose. We can just run it. Anytime the Jets do anything, it just becomes a drop of chaos. That is so well said by you. All right. So that being said, do you think the Jets make a move of any sort?
So here's what I know. Okay, is going on right now. And by the way, the flip side of that conversation, right? The B side of the Brady conversation is this idea of going and getting Matt Stafford, right? And let me tell you something about Matt Stafford. Let me tell you something about the Rams. They just beat the Seahawks. they're not going to go, yeah, unless Matt Stafford walks into Les Snead's office and Sean McVay's sitting there. Matt Stafford says, I want out. Send me to the Jets. I want to get the hell out of here. I'm not down for this rebuild, blah, blah, blah. But they just beat the Seahawks, who, by the way, a lot of people thought could have a dark horse shot in the NFC West. And they did it with Tutu Atwell, busted second-round pick, playing pretty good. Puka, I'm not going to say his last name because I butcher it every single time. The kid out of BYU, right? Who when I went through there, like, he's in Cooper Kupp's hip pocket. We love this kid. He's going to be a player we think could be really good if he can just stay healthy and on the field. So you have them on the strength of Stafford and two young players go out and exceed expectations, win a game. And this little matter of Matt Stafford's contract is one of the least tradable contracts in the NFL. If you traded Matt Stafford, you're talking about a $55 million acceleration on your cap. That's more than if you traded Kyler Murray right now. So you're probably not going to go, yeah, let's just tell everyone we're waving the white flag and maybe we get a first round pick out of Matt Stafford, but oh, that's right, we get the cap acceleration of 50. Let's just completely destroy our situation when we got off on the right foot. So that's the B side.
Let me quick on that B side, throw one other element in. If they traded Matt Stafford, the next day Aaron Donald retires and Cooper Kupp wants out. So they'd have to deal with all that. Go
that's
ahead,
a great point. Yeah, no, that's and you're right. That's a great point. Like Aaron, I mean, okay, so you trade Matt Stafford. The next human in your office is Aaron Donald. You really want to have that conversation? You want to be, yeah.
Not to mention you'd be trading Matt Stafford, whose wife has been very open about her concerns with concussions, to a place that has an offensive line that's going to get him hit. Just stacking bricks.
Too many good points being made right now on this podcast. We should just end it right now. We've made so many good points. Okay, so what are the Jets going to do? Here's what I know about the Jets. Number one, it's very silent there. I think part of it is the shock, right? So there's not a lot of people talking inside the organization, sending messages outward. Number two is I think they're trying to figure out exactly what their options are and what they want to do. They are feeling around the veteran quarterback market. And from what I understand, the first conversations they've had is, here's our offense. We've got Nathaniel Hackett, who out there has had experience either being coached by Nathaniel Hackett or had some time in this offense. Basically, who can come in, step in right away as the backup quarterback to Zach Wilson and help Zach prepare every single week. Because you don't know, everyone assumes, okay, Aaron Rodgers they're still paying. Like, is Aaron Rodgers going to be in the building? I don't know. He's got a rehab. He's got a lot of different things that he's got to do. So this idea that he's just going to be in the quarterback room every day, on the sidelines, like coaching up Zach Wilson, we have no idea. So you need a veteran behind him to help prepare him, get ready. And, oh, by the way, who's capable of playing. Now, Chad Henne is a name going back to the Jacksonville Jaguars days with Nathaniel Hackett, who's had some experience. Great backup for Patrick Mahomes. Stellar at helping Mahomes get prepared. And, by the way, also was able to step in at times and show that, hey, I'm capable in short situations. Plus, he has starting experience. So I would say, think about those players rather than this grand slam walk-off swing of like they're going to go and get this player. And another thing too, like all the conversations I've had with the Jets, including like when I went through camp, like now they could have been lying. It's possible, that you're just doing your best to see every silver lining. I do really think they feel a little better about Zach Wilson. I do think they think mentally he's a step ahead of where he was last year. He's able to rebound from mistakes a little bit better. He handles the locker room so much better than he did a year ago. And Fitz, one other thing. This defense is stellar. Stellar. It is a stellar defense. Yes, Josh Allen disassembled himself, but that defense also disassembled Josh Allen. They're going to continue to do that. And number two, you went out and got Dalvin Cook, which now, looking at it, on the strength of Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall, you could run the football, play defense, go out, be that kind of a dominant team. And I'm not saying they're going to win a Super Bowl, but this defense is good enough to win a lot of games. I think those running backs, it's deep enough and they're impactful enough to win games, protect the quarterback. I'm not saying Zach Wilson is Trent Dilfer. I'm not saying this defense is the Baltimore Ravens historic defense that led them to a Super Bowl, right? but they're damn good. And I think people are going to figure that out as this season rolls on, exactly how good that defense really is.
Yeah, you mentioned Breece Hall. We should, again, we were talking about Chubb earlier.
Yeah.
Breece Hall to run the way that he ran coming off the injury. I mean,
It's ridiculous.
Breece Hall was
unbelievable.
It was an American delight. It was a treasure to watch him run the football that way. And concerning, there were a lot of concerns. We got plenty of time over the course of the next few weeks to get into the concerns of the Bills, but there were a lot of things that did not look pretty for Buffalo in that game. And the Jets certainly are. The Jets defense is part of what gets the credit. I have a sneaking suspicion the Bills are going to look much different on Sunday than they did on Monday night. But man, I don't know. The Jets, if you're right, if that defense plays that well and they run that well, maybe they don't need as much from Zach Wilson. And if you get in the dance, you got a chance. Playoffs could happen. So, all right. So we've given you the biggest stories, but we want to capture a few little things around here with a new segment. All right, Charles Robinson, you ready for this? We're going to do a little bit of news or noise. So I'll make a statement and we decide if there's some legs to it. There's something to think about. Or if it's just a bunch of noise, a bunch of bullshit we don't care about. And we start with NFLPA. All right. The NFL Players Association is calling for all natural grass fields, no more turf after the Aaron Rodgers injury. We talked earlier about CBA negotiations and talks and all of these things. News or noise to all natural grass fields coming from the Players Association?
It's noise. We have this happen every single year, and it's going to continue to be noise until the NFLPA has rock solid data that can back up all these injuries only happen. I mean, the league trots out repeatedly. The data shows as many injuries on natural grass as on field turf. The second something happens on field turf, immediately everyone runs and says, I mean, look, we had injuries this weekend. Some happened on natural grass. Obviously, the Aaron Rodgers one happened on the field turf. It's going to continue to be noise until the data is overwhelming. And then at that point, I think maybe owners start to rethink whether or not this is something they need to change.
Also, just acknowledging the amount of football that would be happening on real grass at MetLife because the two teams play there. And, you know, me being up in New England right now, like the flooding that's happening because of all of the storms that have come through, just I'm not saying that it's better, but we would be sitting here talking about the terrible turf conditions the same way.
Fitz, how do you swap out? I mean, we literally saw the Giants play, and then we saw the clips on social media. Like, look at them; they're erasing the end zones, and you can't do that with a natural field. I mean, the only way you really realistically could play back-to-back games like that, particularly in wet conditions, is if you had a second field to roll in. I mean, maybe that technology, you know, obviously there's some stadiums that can remove the field on wheels and get it, you know, get sun. I mean, you go to, obviously, the Arizona Cardinals have a field they can roll out to get sun. You better have a field you can store somewhere if you're going to play at MetLife and have back-to-back games like this.
Yeah, Allegiant does the rollout also, but also if you look at Allegiant by the end of the year, because of the desert, sometimes that field doesn't look all that great.
Not great.
I'm thinking of a rolled out, like, man, it didn't hit me till I lived in Connecticut so much. Like, Connecticut winter rolled out field is not going to be fun. All right, news or noise next. Colin Kaepernick's agent reached out to the Jets. I said earlier, it's like an obligation. We say Aaron Rodgers when these things happen. It feels like an obligation. I'm going to go first on this and just remind everybody that the guy hasn't played in the league in 7 years. Like, even if the Kaepernick hill is one that you want to loudly die on continually, I think it's also okay to have the conversation of what could have happened at one point versus what is happening right now. Quarterback that's been removed for 7 years, supposed to come in on a Super Bowl caliber team. Like, this is so much noise. It's obnoxious to me. Tell me if I'm missing something.
It is. It's noise. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like, I don't, and again, I am covered that story, right? Top to bottom. No doubt Colin Kaepernick was blackballed from the league. There's zero question. But now we have moved into a phase where it would be ludicrous for an NFL team to go out and say, yeah, we're going to roll the dice on our Super Bowl roster by going and getting, instead of a multitude of quarterbacks that have experience now, who have played recently, who, you know, it's not even worth addressing. It's noise, and it's unfortunately, it's noise that, as you said, it has now become obnoxious because we know he was blackballed. I get it. I'm with that. But at some point you cross the threshold of time where you're like, it's really not realistic to look at the NFL or even these teams and go, well, geez, how can you not go out and sign him now? Those days were years ago. Now, any coach could look at me now and say, come on, man. Like, is this realistic to you? And me say, no, it's not. 4 years ago? I'd be like, yeah, no, I probably could sign him still. Not now.
I think to that point, and then we'll move on. But it's noise that hurts the conversation that could still be happening about what did happen, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
this is now noise that just makes it,
it
this is
distracts.
comical at this point. So I agree with you. All right, one more news and noise bit here. Arthur Smith. Now, a lot of Falcons takes, and I'm trying to figure out if Desmond Ritter is really the answer. But Drake London, this is Arthur Smith saying Drake London doesn't care how many targets he gets. We just care about winning. And I think a lot of fans are looking at the Falcons being like, cool, like you care about winning, but you have all these players that are supposed to be great. You never use them. Is it news or noise that Drake London doesn't care how many targets he gets?
Come on, man. I mean, which is the news and which is the noise? He's a wide receiver. What wide receiver in history? By the way, young, extremely young. I think he was like 21, right? Like what wide receiver in history who's been a first round pick, who has pride, right? Come out of the USC program big time. He's prototypical when you want to talk about the wide receiver you want, speed, size, all those things. Of course he wants the ball. Now is he going to contradict his coach? No. If you win games, and you keep moving on in this trend, does it make it harder for him to say anything? Of course. It's easier to complain when you're losing and not getting the ball. But no, I mean it's ridiculous to suggest that he's okay getting. I think it was like zero. Did he get a target? He had like zero
No,
targets, didn't he?
no.
He didn't even get a single target.
And this is where I don't understand what the Falcons and Arthur Smith are doing. Specifically, it doesn't always feel like they're aligned, right? Because to me, sometimes you got to have some idea. Like Arthur Smith with the Titans as an offensive coordinator, loved to use a mobile quarterback and a couple of big tight ends. Like I get it, he'd love to run the football. I get what he does and how he does it. I understand that. But the front office has given him versatile weapons that
Right.
on most teams would be dynamic playmakers. I'm not talking about fantasy football numbers. I'm talking about real game
Yeah.
impact. Like Drake London should be a real game impact guy. Kyle Pitts should be a real game impact guy. They should be difference makers. And
Well,
as much as we love to look at players and say, well, this player crashed and burned, like coaches got to know how to take advantage of the tools they got.
yeah, well, Fitz, I mean, we talked about this last season. We are like, why is Kyle Pitts not on the field? Like, why can't this guy get on the field for Arthur Smith? And it was because there were issues blocking, right? It was like he wants a tight end who can block for the running game. And instead, he's got an ultra versatile weapon who's kind of a tweener, right? He's in between a tight end and a wide receiver. But that's what they loved. That's what made him the fourth pick in the draft, was because you can create mismatches. But then you have a coach who's like, well, the mismatch I want is when he's an inline tight end blocking, someone so we can run the football. I think there's going to have to be an element here, given the pieces that he has, to augment the offense and how he uses players. And I give him props. Like, hey, coming out week one, the way he used, Tyler Algier. I mean, like, I'm like, wow, okay, this guy clearly he's got running back depth here. But we can talk all we want about, yeah, everyone's happy they're winning, they're not getting, touches and looks and development. But at some point, Arthur Blank has to go. We're pouring assets into these players. Can't we figure out a way to run the football and also utilize the talent that we've spent first round picks on?
I don't think the Falcons are going to be great this year. I think they're going to be okay. And I don't think Desmond Ritter is going to prove to be the answer. And when those things happen, Arthur Blank is going to have to make a very tough decision on Arthur Smith. If there is a new coaching regime brought in, I could see this being one of the most coveted jobs we've seen in years.
A lot
Because
of talent.
when you look at the weapons that they have,
Hmm.
if they are able to get even pretty good quarterback play. And I think that they'll be looking at one of those, as you mentioned, 5 quarterbacks in the first round of the draft next year. I think that's where they're going to be. There will be coaches tripping over themselves to get to
Oh yeah.
Atlanta with that much talent. They won. They're 1-0. And as I started this whole thing off saying, like, it can't tell me the Raiders aren't perfect. They won 1-0. But you could also look even in a win, as I have to sometimes, and say, hey, there's better. I think the Falcons could be better suited if they actually use their weapons. That's my hot take of the
No,
day.
that's news. That's news. That's a coveted roster. I would agree with you. That's not noise. Like, that's, if that was a job that came open, you would have a lot of people looking at that roster and going, really starting. We're not starting from zero. We're starting pretty far ahead there.
Speaking of news, if you want to follow all the news, make sure you follow C-Rob on Twitter at Charles Robinson. It's easy. Follow me at Jason Fitz. Of course, you can always follow our great teammate at Jory Epstein on Twitter as well. She's getting you caught up on everything you need to know. And our producer at SJ Rochelle. He's doing all the God's work behind the glass, making us look pretty and sound good. It's really a delight, everything he does. We'll be back tomorrow with Zero Blitz. Make sure you're subscribing to our podcast link. Get out there, 5-star review if you loved it. If you didn't love it, don't review it. And then tell everybody to check it out. In the meantime, C-Rob, tell everybody how we can help support Terez Paylor's legacy.
Yeah, if you could check out breakingtea.com/Terez. You can get the All Juice tee or hoodie if you check that out. And remember that proceeds from that purchase go to support the Terez Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can also contribute to that scholarship directly, as well as the one in his name at Missouri, if you check out our podcast description. So if you could, we'd appreciate you, again, as Fitz said, helping to continue that legacy.
I got the hoodie. I can tell you it is soft and supple in every good way. All right. Make sure you leave us that 5-star.
Like my abs.
Oh, if for no reason other than the abs. 5-star review, rate review. Tell your friends, your family, your enemies, and everybody to check us out. We'll be back next Wednesday with more inside coverage for Charles Robinson. I'm Jason Fitz. Thanks for hanging out with us.